Good evening and welcome to our Tech Talks and Kaute Talks webinar discussing innovation deficits in solving climate crisis. I'm Jussi-Pekka Teini from Tech and will be hosting today's discussion. We still have a long way to go in stopping climate change. Outside of last year, when the global pandemic halted much of global operations, emissions have been growing year by year when they should be, of course, reducing. According to the United Nations Environmental Programme, we still need to reduce our emissions at the rate of 7.6% annually for the next decades. That's a faster pace than what we saw last year in a global pandemic. How can we do this? Is it even possible? How much more innovation and deployment would it require? These are the topics that we'll discuss today with our distinguished guests that we will introduce in just a minute. But first of all, as I said, this webinar is a collaboration of Tech and Kaute Foundation. Tuomas, can you please introduce yourself and Kaute?
Yes, thank you, Jussi-Pekka. Welcome everybody also from my behalf. So my name is Tuomas Olkku and I'm an Executive Director of Kaute Foundation. Kaute Foundation funds research in business and technical fields. We do it mostly through individual research grants. And the Foundation's mission is to support sustainable renewal of Finnish businesses and the society. We have also started a webinar series called Kaute Talks, covering these themes that are close to Foundation's mission. And with the webinars, we aim to foster discussion, especially between the research community and people working in businesses and applying the research results, and this way kind of help on our part to accelerate turning the research findings into real-life business applications. And we're very happy to cooperate with Tech on this event, and I would like to thank Jussi-Pekka for very smooth cooperation in organizing the webinar, as well as big thanks to our speakers who are contributing their time and expertise for the event. So once again, welcome everybody from my behalf, and I'll hand it back to Jussi-Pekka for introducing the speakers. Thanks.
Thank you, Tuomas. We are also super happy to organize this event with Kaute Foundation, since we have very aligned goals in advancing science and technology. Moving on to our distinguished guests today, they include the CEO of Climate Leadership Coalition, Jouni Keronen, CEO of Finnish Climate Fund, Paula Laine, and climate policy expert Oras Tynkkynen. Welcome everyone. And first we'll start with a round of introductions with our guests. So please tell a little bit about yourself and how your work relates to the innovation deficits in solving climate crisis. And Jouni, would you like to start?
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here. So my background shortly. So I have 4 academic degrees. So I studied power plants and I graduated 1983. Then I was studying power grids and IT, and I made my PhD in 1993 from artificial intelligence applications to power grids. And I was also working twice in California. I was working first with VTT and then Imatran Voima, the predecessor of Fortum. I worked in California for 3 years, and actually I was there when Al Gore wrote his book, The Earth in Balance. So that was the first time when I studied about climate change, 1993. And then it took like 10 years before I realized how serious this will be. And I moved to Fortum, and I was there working with 6 different vice president positions. I was working for product development, innovation, purchasing, and then I was also 8 years as chief information officer. And then when I was working with innovations, then the hard reality started to hit us from everywhere. So Fortum is an energy company, so climate change changing the way big time how the energy companies are working. And after Al Gore wrote his books Inconvenient Truth and movies and everything, so that also became my full-time life. And then Antti Herlin, who is the chairman of KONE, he got interested what the Finnish businesses can do with the climate change. And then I was Fortum representative of the meetings what Antti Herlin hosted in 2013. And that led to the Climate Leadership Coalition. And Sitra also helped to establish the coalition in 2014. And then I was invited to be the founding CEO of this Climate Leadership Coalition. And at first it was like half-time job, but with 7 founding members, but now it's more than full-time job. We have a 5-person team and 87 members. So now the Climate Leadership Coalition is the largest business climate coalition in Europe. So this is short intro from my point of view.
Thank you, Jouni. That's a really inspiring career, and really nice that you have the also the kind of digitalization viewpoint from your career to this subject, because it's always discussed how those two are interlinked, but there's maybe not that much expertise and collaboration between these fields. Okay, moving on to our next guest, Paula Laine. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. And thanks for, actually it was nice to hear also Jouni's background as a nice story. I have a master's degree from the Helsinki University of Technology, currently Aalto, in engineering, physics and business. And the first 10 years of my career, I served the global telecommunications sector, like obviously many other Finns as well, with quite meaningful actually purpose also there in ensuring access to millions and later on billions of people. After that career, I switched to societal focus with Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund, and served there as a management team member for almost 10 years, responsible for Sitra's strategy and foresight, actions, megatrends, and so on. As part of that time, for example, Sitra was very active in helping CLC to be set up, as Jouni was referencing there. Then, like 3 years ago, I joined actually then the state development company Vake's board as a board member, and further on then almost now 2 years ago I became the CEO of the company, which then from Christmas 2020 actually became the Finnish Climate Fund. And currently the Finnish Climate Fund, the CEO of which I am, is a special purpose company that is solely tackling climate change by providing funding to both commercial scaling up of physical and digital climate solutions and platforms that enable emission reductions. And our main instrument is capital loans.
Thank you, Paula. That's also really inspiring, and it's made me really happy that Vake is now a climate fund, and especially focusing on that. It's a really great thing to have, and will help in making Finland a global leader in the sector. So last but not least, we have Oras Tynkkynen. Oras, please introduce yourself.
First of all, thanks for the invitation, and good to be here among good old friends and colleagues. I've been working on climate action in different capacities and roles for the past little less than a quarter of a century, first starting in civil society, running different NGO climate campaigns, then moving on to policy making, serving in the parliament and the prime minister's office. And then now for the past 6 years or so as a climate policy expert, both in my own company and in the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra that Paula already also mentioned, and actually Jouni as well. And to your question about how my work relates to this innovation field, I think my contribution is mostly in the interface between policy and innovation, and more specifically how policy can drive introducing and implementing and deploying faster these very promising innovative solutions that are out there but are not yet applied at scale.
Thank you, Oras. That's a really long history of climate expertise accumulated with you. That's really great, and it's also of course I knew this beforehand, and it's difficult to organize a climate-related event in Finland without a connection to Sitra. But as mentioned, all of our panelists today have some kind of connection to Sitra, and yeah, they have been really active in setting the Finnish climate action scene. We also have this fourth guest that unfortunately, due to schedule issues, couldn't after all make it to this broadcast live. But we have a keynote coming from him. But before that, dear audience in the living rooms and wherever you are watching this stream, we also invite you to participate in this discussion in the comments section. Whether you are in Facebook or YouTube, your comments and questions should reach us here in the studio. So please send your comments and questions and participate in the discussion, and we'll try to fit them in our broadcast. We will somewhat operate, not fully, but somewhat on a first come, first serve basis. So get those questions early in if you really want them to be discussed today. But now let's take some time to hear more about the already available off-the-shelf solutions that we have today in climate technology from Chad Frischman, who is the Vice President and Research Director of Project Drawdown. And Project Drawdown is a framework for climate solutions that are already available today, off-the-shelf, for scaling in a mass scale, and by that achieving a point when we get on the track of reducing emissions all the way to zero and even negative emissions. But please, Jonas, can you now play our video keynote greeting from Chad? Thank you.
Hi there. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today to learn about climate solutions, actions that we can all take every day to get on the pathway to achieving drawdown. But what is it that we mean when we talk about drawdown? Drawdown is that point in time when atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's that point when we take more of those heat-trapping gases out of the atmosphere than we put in. And the proposition here is really rather simple. If we can change the concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, we can essentially stop global warming and begin the long process of reversing it. In fact, achieving drawdown is a prerequisite to solving the climate emergency that we face today and future generations to come. But how do we get there? Well, first we have to understand where are the sources coming from so that we can identify the solutions that reduce the sources of the problem. We also need to understand, once the greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere, how do we pull them out using natural and engineered sinks? How do we enhance those sinks? And we need to fundamentally improve society so that when we're implementing solutions, we do so from a human rights-based approach with justice, equity, and inclusion at its heart. We need to shift the system itself to move from a system that is inherently exploitative and extractive to a new normal that's by nature restorative and regenerative, where well-being for people and planet are placed at the heart of everything we do as a society and economy. So how do we get there? Well, first, where are we today? What are those sources of emissions? Now, emissions come from just about everything we do as a human species, from the electricity generated from coal, oil, and gas-fired plants when we turn on our lights, to the gas that's burned in our furnaces to heat our homes, to the amount of, to the stuff that's produced that we consume every day in factories from those smokestacks, to when we go out of our homes, we move from point A to point B and turn on our internal combustion engine and burn petrol from the petrol and release energy and emissions from our tailpipe, to when we fly all over the world. Even the very food that we consume on a day-to-day basis generates emissions and how it's produced and how it decomposes. So everything we do produces emissions, and they all enter the atmosphere. The good thing is that we have natural processes called utilizing photosynthesis that convert carbon dioxide into plants, biomass, and soil organic carbon. This happens in terrestrial or land and ocean ecosystems. And this happens every day, every year. Unfortunately, we're creating so much stuff and consuming so much and producing all of that emissions. 59% of everything all the emissions that are generated stay in the atmosphere. And that's because the natural sinks only have a certain capacity to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And we are also degrading our ecosystems at an alarming rate, which reduces their capacity even further. But we need to have solutions that can turn off the sources to zero, so we stop emitting sources as a starting point, and we enhance the natural sinks to pull down what's already in the atmosphere. Now, I lead a team of researchers from all over the world, and over the last 7 years, together we have mapped, modeled, and described the most substantive set of real existing technologies and practices that exist today, and map them in part of a framework that reduce sources, enhance sinks, and improve society in a way that can achieve drawdown, that can achieve the future that we want as a system of solutions. And all of these technologies already exist today. That's the thing. We have at our hands, at our fingertips, solutions that work, that are scientifically valid, economically viable. So it's not a question of technology anymore. It's not a question of inventing something of the future. We have what we need at hand in order to solve the climate emergency. We just need to move farther and faster than we thought possible. And it's really a matter of will, it's a matter of choice. We need to choose the future that we want. And first, we have to name what that is. We have to look at the future as a horizon, the place where we want to be. We have to name that future, a regenerative future, and take the first step on that pathway through that system of solutions in order to get there. And this is the mapping that allows us to do that. But we're also going to need coming attractions. We've also, our team has also reviewed and evaluated new technologies that are on the pipeline. And yes, these new innovations are going to come along, and they are going to be impactful, and in some cases necessary. But we need to double down. We need to focus really intensely on the solutions that already are at hand because of the urgency in which we are facing this climate emergency. We need everything we need to be addressing everything throughout all these different areas of human activity with technologies that are here, with practices that are readily available, that we know what to do. We need to innovate them. We need the existing solutions as well. We make them more efficient, cheaper, and have less intense in their resource requirements, so make them more resource productive. These are where the innovations and innovative solutions can take place, and what we already know work. And then let the coming tractions, when they come on, make us accelerate our progress even farther and faster. But let's take a look at what the solutions that exist are. And here's a list of some of them. Our team has mapped over 82 different existing solutions, and this represents 25 of the solutions that have the most substantive impact on the climate, on the atmosphere, essentially. And so to the right of this slide, you'll see numbers. These represent gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent that are either avoided or reduced or sequestered over a 30-year period from 2020 to 2050. The first number represents a scenario that's aligned with our 2 degrees Celsius warming target. And then the other number represents alignment to the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and most scientists around the world tell us is the pathways we need to ensure a sustainable future for our species and for the planet, and to avoid some tipping points that are going to make things much harder to deal with later on in the future. So this is where the urgency comes. And as you see, just with the 25 solutions, the diversity of solutions, it's an eclectic group that includes food waste and managed grazing, lighting, and solar power, and it comes from all different areas of human activity that we just talked about. Some of the things that are really interesting is the importance of renewable energy systems. This is obvious because electricity generation from those coal, oil, and gas-fired plants account for about 25% of global greenhouse gases. And so they're incredibly important set of solutions, and we need to achieve 100% clean renewable grid as soon as possible using solar, wind, and a diversity of other renewable electricity sources that are readily available. But where do the other 70% come from? 70% of emissions, 75% of emissions. And these come from a lot of different areas, including our industry. So again, all the stuff that we produce and consume every day, and transportation, how we move around in the world, and our buildings ultimately are net emitters because of all the energy that they use, both in terms of the energy they use from the grid, as well as energy that they combust on site. And this happens throughout these different sectors. There's also materials themselves that are part of the problem. Refrigerants, for example, are one of them, represent some of the most important set of solutions because hydrofluorocarbons, which are used by air conditioners and refrigerators to cool the air, are used ubiquitously. And these hydrofluorocarbons are hundreds to thousands of times more potent to greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So we can manage the leakage of these gases from existing equipment and destroy them at the end of life. And we can also change the refrigerants to natural alternatives. So again, we have to remember to think about how we can change, reduce the amount of impact of the existing system and find alternatives in order to that are part of the solution. And also, one of the most surprising things I think that we found, because there's a tendency in thinking about climate action to focus on the energy systems, is the importance of food. What we consume, how we consume it, and how it is produced represents some of the most important set of solutions we all make every day in terms of what we consume. We have power as consumers to choose the types of products that we are consuming and how much we're purchasing, and ultimately what we're actually going to consume at the end of the day and not allowed to go to waste. And these decisions have ramifications, have implications across the supply chain. And so together, this represents some of the most important set of solutions that we have at our fingertips that we can implement every day. We also have to think about our ecosystems themselves. So our terrestrial and ocean systems, again, are the big storehouses of carbon. So we think of trees as giant sticks of carbon, right? Because they convert, plants convert carbon dioxide into plant biomass, so trees, as well as soil organic carbon. So the forests that exist today are vast storehouses of carbon. And we also have the potential to take currently degraded land and restore it, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and through drawdown, which happens every year, and storing it in trees and forests. So this is an incredibly important set of solutions, and also deeply connected to food, because when you take land and food together, they represent the most substantive sectors or areas of human activity that we have solutions for, because these solutions both avoid emissions as well as promote and enhance those sinks across the board. So this really fundamentally changes how we think about climate action and solutions, to shift not only thinking about energy systems, which are of course incredibly important to focus on electricity, buildings, transportation, industry, and materials, but also on our food system and how we use land and our ocean system. So it's incredibly important to think that. One of the most surprising things. Another really surprising thing is the importance of health and education. But it also becomes pretty obvious when we think about providing this basic human right to choose when, how, and if to raise a family, by providing basic right to voluntary reproductive health care, use of contraception, and the freedom to choose your livelihood without fear of persecution. These are really fundamentally important to future population growth. And so is education. Providing 12 to 13 years of schooling for boys and girls has the impact of dramatically different life outcomes, improved economic activity, delayed onset of marriage, smaller family size, and ultimately the uptake of family planning resources that have the effect of reducing future estimated population growth. Now, that reduction in population affects everything else in the system. That reduces the amount of electricity that's demanded, reduces the amount of buildings and food and just about everything. All the energy, all the emissions that are consumed are produced to meet that higher demand for that higher population estimation are reduced by providing the basic human right to choose when, how, and if to raise a family. Of course, this is one benefit of health and education, but there's a cascading series of benefits to improving livelihoods, to providing basic human rights. This is a human rights and about gender equity and equality, and it's about justice first and foremost, and it has an additional impact on our environment, on our planet, and on the atmosphere. So when we think about all these solutions, and again, these are just 25 of the 82. The thing that's really important to remember that these are all opportunities. They're opportunities to create the future that we actually want. And now is our opportunity to choose that future. What is that future going to be? And we have to name that. We have to name what that marker on the horizon, the place where we actually want to be in the future. Not focusing on fixing the past and tweaking things. Let's envision where we want to be and take the first step on the pathway there and see around us that are right in front of us all of the opportunities to create a future economy, a green economy, an economy of abundance that's ultimately regenerative in nature, that is growing and expanding in tandem with nature and not exploiting it. We need to have a system of restoration and regeneration, not exploitation and extraction. And when we envision that future that we want, we can achieve it. But we need to figure out how to actually do that, right? We need how we're going to pay for that future. And so we've done an analysis, a conservative financial analysis of all of these solutions being implemented over these 30 years to achieve these scenarios, to align with our climate targets. And we did the financial estimations of what they could be. Again, based on conservative estimations, conservative numbers. And what we found is that it takes about $20 to $30 trillion more than what we'd have to spend anyway. Again, we're going to have to be spending money, and our economy is going to grow in the future. But if we spend $20 to $30 trillion over 30 years in addition, we can actually invest in that future that we want. We can choose that future. And there's a cost to it. But here's the kicker. The net operational savings for that system, again, compared to what we would have to do already, is about $95 to $145 trillion over that 30 years. It's a no-brainer. This is a return on an investment that more than meets the basic requirement of any kind of investment. This is an incredible return in terms of the financial implications, let alone the cascading benefits to human and planetary well-being that we always want to keep in consideration. So this is a system of solutions that is affordable, that exists today, that can fundamentally shift the way we do business to a new system. We can reimagine that system of the future that's built on energy sources of abundance, that capitalize on the power of the sun, the wind, our geothermal energy, that create abundance, enough energy for all people on the planet, that reduce air pollution, improve health outcomes, improve educational attainment, and improve economic development all over the world, always by capitalizing on natural resources like every other form of life on this planet. We can move around the world with joy, with electric bikes and scooters and public transit. Let's make public transit beautiful and engaging, because that's a way that we can have different choices in how we move around the world and how we work. We can transmit great distances in a blink of an eye, like we're doing right now. Avoid the commuter time, avoid the use of cars by being more efficient with work and having more time with our family, friends, neighbors, and communities. We can rethink and reimagine how we use stuff to create a circular economy. All this that we've already extracted and put in the system, we can use over and over and over again. We can change how we live and where we work to have buildings being part of the solution instead of part of the problem. They can be both embodied with solutions in terms of, avoiding concrete and steel and adopting wood. And they can also operationally, the operational missions, there are many solutions that can turn the buildings into a drawdown building, or a climate positive building, a planet positive building. And we need to take our currently degraded land and think about ways we can utilize that to change our economy from an extractive one that's based on death, that's based on fossil fuels and extraction, and one that's based on growth and life and regeneration. And bamboo is a great example of a substance, a material that can be used for anything: buildings, bridges, bicycles, clothing, and be done as part of a regenerative system. We need to restore our land. Again, forest restoration in temperate and in tropical environments. This is drawdown in action every year, also benefiting biodiversity and essential for life on this planet. We can protect the forests that already are extant because they are the great storehouses of carbon and the storehouses of biodiversity. We can and need to also protect our ocean systems and restore them so that we can restore and protect our kelp forests and restore the trophic pyramid, increase our fishing stocks. Again, improve life on the planet, improve biodiversity in a way that's beneficial to humanity and the environment and the atmosphere. And how we actually produce food is incredibly important. We can produce things regeneratively. This is one of many regenerative agricultural practices that we profile and we research. And regenerative annual cropping is a way, comprises of multiple different practices, including no tillage or reduced tillage, cover cropping, crop rotation, the use of compost and manure application, and organic practices. And taken together, these practices, which are tried and true. This is how we've been practicing agriculture for millennia, and smallholder farmers and indigenous peoples are still practicing regenerative forms of agriculture today, but they're being increasingly replaced by modern agriculture, which focuses on monocropping, tillage, use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, all of which degrade the land and turn into a net emitter of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. But regenerative annual practices, tried and true, restore carbon to the soil. They bring carbon back to the land. And in doing so, they restore, improve water retention, increase yield, and therefore improve smallholder and large farming operations alike. This is an example of a win-win-win-win-win set of win-win-win solution, and is one of many regenerative practices that can transform the way we produce food. But we also have to transform the way we're consuming and what we're consuming to consume a more plant-rich diet, to eat more beautiful plants. And this is also has health benefits, nutritional benefits to us, to humanity. And when we adopt a healthy diet, a plant-rich diet, we reduce the amount of animal-based proteins we eat. Now, this is not a vegan or vegetarian diet. I applaud anyone who makes those life decisions. However, there are trade-offs, even with those dietary choices, always trade-offs. So what we're looking at here is really a healthy diet that's composite of many different kinds of diets, your choices, because it's going to be different wherever you are in the world. But most importantly, it's about reducing overconsumption, particularly of meat, but overconsumption of everything, particularly happens in high-income countries, and increasing consumption in at least in less developed countries or low-income countries that show low protein and caloric intake. So it's about rebalancing so that everyone in the world can have a healthy, nutrient-rich diet. When we do that, that's where plant-rich diets become actually part of the solution, because it reduces the amount of high emission-intensive commodities and overconsumption. But we also have to think about how much food is actually lost and wasted across the supply chain. I mentioned a little bit earlier. And when we think about the fact that 30 to 40% of all food that's produced is not even consumed, is astounding. And it produces 8% of global greenhouse gases or more. And this is probably underestimated in terms of the overall food loss and waste, probably actually much more. And so with 800 million people in the world going hungry today, this is one of the dumbest things we could be doing as a species. Wasting and having losses across the supply chain, which are solutions are readily available. We can avoid those losses and wastage and prevent them through technology and through behavior change. It matters where you are in the world, but the important thing to note is these are not hard solutions. They're readily available. And we can make that choice to reduce food loss and reduce food loss and waste, and actually feed the world's hungry population and reduce stressors on our cropland. Because when we implement all of these solutions together as a system of solutions, we implement all those regenerative agricultural practices. We have 13 or more profiled in Drawdown. We implement a plant-rich diet, and we reduce our food loss and waste. Our research shows that as a system, when we adopt this as a system, we would produce enough food on current cropland to feed the world's population, growing population, now until 2050 and beyond, a healthy, nutrient-rich diet, without having to cut down any new forest on current cropland only. That's amazing. That's astounding. And our research shows that there's enough cropland still in order to produce biomass, more dedicated biomass for things like bioplastics, part of the solution. or bio or organic-based insulation, or other kinds of substances part of that bio-based regenerative economy of the future. But this happens only when we adopt things as a system of solutions. There are no silver bullets. No one or two or top 10 or top 20 are going to get us there. We need all of the solutions taken together in this framework to reduce sources, enhance sinks, and improve society in order to achieve drawdown. The great thing is we want them whether or not global warming was even a problem. Because again, all of these solutions have a cascading series of benefits to human and planetary well-being by addressing health outcomes, nutrition, educational outcomes, economic development, improved biodiversity protection, all the things that things like the that we can envision in the future that we actually want to achieve. All the great challenges become possible when we address this as a system of solutions to solve for climate. We solve for climate, drawdown becomes possible through these emissions reductions, yes, but regeneration becomes possible too, because we are thinking beyond just the atmosphere and thinking to how these solutions are implemented as a system in parallel with justice, equity, and inclusion at its heart. We have to reimagine the existing system and transform it to see it as a global system of systems of all being interconnected and feeding into each other and out of each other. This is all of human activity connected as a whole, connecting local to global to local. And when we do this, we can start to reimagine the system not as a hierarchy and power structure, but as an organic system of solutions working together, and the possibilities these solutions can achieve in a resilient, adaptable ecosystem. We envision this not as a hierarchical system, but as an ecosystem simulating life. And then in doing so, we can achieve our 2 degrees Celsius warming targets. We can achieve our 1.5 degrees Celsius warming targets. It matters how ambitious we are, how fast, how urgently we implement solutions. The solutions order will change, and that's okay. These solutions are not static, they're dynamic. They're always going to change as new solutions come on. Some of those coming attractions come online. There's going to change a little bit. What matters is these are the solutions that we need today, that we have the capacity to take action on right now. And we can achieve our targets. And if we are ambitious enough, we can go beyond those climate targets, and we should, to the future that we want. We can achieve our sustainable development goals set by the UN to ensure a sustainable planet connecting people and planet when we implement all of these solutions, because all the solutions can be mapped to achieving our climate targets, to achieving and solving our climate emergency, and also are directly or indirectly linked to the achievement of the sustainable development goals. They are connected because they're opportunities. They're opportunities to even go beyond sustainability, to a regenerative system, to create that future that we actually want. And we can get there. We can build that together. What that future looks like, a future of abundance, a future that's not based purely on profit, but based on well-being, where we have human and planetary well-being interconnected, working together. And we can do that because we are the generation to do it. This is the time. We have a level of urgency that we can't ignore. And we have the technology in practice for the first time to really create that system. So I encourage us all to link arms, work together intergenerationally. No longer think about X, Y, and Z generations, but think of we're all in it together. One regeneration now and in the future. We have to think long-term, not short-term. We have to think about our species, think about the planet, and take the steps necessary, every one of us, to walk on the pathway to that marker on the horizon that we have chosen. The future we choose is readily available when we work in systems, when we work together, when we work collaboratively. I look forward to the questions to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. And unfortunately, due to schedule conflicts, we couldn't have Chad for questions after all. But thank you, Chad, if you're listening this later on for your keynote. So that was an inspiring framework and a great framework, and I like how it focuses on the scalable solutions. For example, with the land use and agriculture, they're just political decisions which we need to make, which are fast to implement if we choose to. But then we have, on the other hand, the there are not so fast ones to implement and scale up, which include the technologies that we need for climate solutions. We have some good comments on the chats of YouTube and Facebook. Raili Kajaste and Kari Huoponen highlight that the drawdown model lacks circular economy approach, which is a good point. I also agree that it's mature enough should be included in the framework. And there are also really good other comments. Thank you for that. Keep them coming and questions too. So to sum up, we already have the wide set of both technological and non-technological solutions that we could scale today. But to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees, we will also need new solutions. To highlight one recent discussion about this, Dr. Fatih Birol, the CEO of International Energy Agency, IEA for short, recently said in a speech at Joe Biden's climate summit that IEA analysis shows that about half the reductions to get to net zero emissions by 2050 will need to come from technologies that are not yet ready for market. So about half the solutions are still not market ready. And he also said this calls for massive leaps in innovation across batteries, hydrogen, synthetic fuels, carbon capture, and many other technologies. And this is kind of the discussion framing that we have for today. We have these mature solutions or nearly mature solutions in technologies that are included in the Project Drawdown list. And these solutions still need scaling innovations. Then the second category is the solutions in a younger stage of innovation maturity, such as carbon capture and storage, small modular reactors, clean hydrogen, etc. So let's now move to discussion with our guests about these topics. So for today's topic, we have these two dimensions, the more mature ones and the less mature ones that still require huge amounts of RDI efforts to be off-the-shelf solutions. And let's first start with the big picture on how climate technology advances from a concept to a mature commercial product. Jouni, you have been working closely with companies that are interested in climate solutions and have been providing them yourself. What kind of success stories do we have from Finland that would demonstrate the different stages of innovation process?
Such a complicated question. But one example which always comes to my mind is the biofuel story, for example, by Neste, that it goes back actually tens of years. That I had a pleasure to know Jaakko Ihamuotila, who was the managing director of Neste a long time, and also heard many of his presentations. And he told that they were thinking that how a small oil company can survive with the big ones, and then at the end of 80s they concluded that they need to be ahead of the mass market. And then they started to create these low lead fuels and so on. So it is surprisingly huge R&D package what they have in Neste. If I recall, they have like 4,000 people developing new products. So unusual oil company, I believe. And then this level of maturity. So for example, how things develop was that in Finland was the first country who took the carbon price in use like 1990. And then the taxes with the fuels varied between 40 and 80% for a long time, but they didn't trigger any investments. But when the blending obligation came, first 3%, that guaranteed some market for the biofuels. And then actually they were ready to invest to the biorefineries. And that was a very important step in getting the first products into the market. And now the traditional biofuels are more or less already mature. They are still finding out companies more and more sources for the raw materials. So there are mature biofuels and then there are immature biofuels. But of course, there are many other cases as well in various industries. But relating to this presentation, it was really exhaustive, and I try to simplify things a little bit. So I see that we have like 3 big shifts coming. So the first one is this solar economy, where we electrify everything, and then is the produce electricity, solar, wind, and then use hydrogen power to axe food and so on. Then the next really big change is circular economy, where we need to redesign all the equipments and materials and products we have, and then all the materials which are non-renewable, they need to circulate forever. And then the third big change is this land use and nature-based solutions. And we even analyzed the EU numbers and find out that after about 2050, that when we have first reduced the emissions like 90% from the current levels, then what is left is the food production emissions from the land use. They are majority, and then the carbon sinks from forest and other land use, and they are the majority in carbon sinks. So after 2050, this land use and nature-based solutions become dominating. So I would categorize, my elevator talk is that these 3 big changes are now telling that what needs to be done. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jouni, and yeah, actually, Fatih Birol has also commented on the electricity, that solar is the new king of electricity with the kind of lowest prices around the world per kilowatt hour of electricity. So that is definitely happening already.
And Jussi-Pekka, can I complement that way? I was about to saying that solar and wind are more or less mature, but if you see what kind of development they have had and how they are still going to develop, I say that they will still, the cost efficiency will improve a lot. And I was working a long time with IT, so I know the Moore's law. I heard that it's now a little bit slowed down, but it has worked like 30, 40 years, that every like 18 months, the cost efficiency and performance ratio is doubling. And I see that there is still a lot to development to come both from solar and wind. So they are already now cost competitive, but they are not mature yet. They will still develop a lot.
Exactly. They are mature, at least in the sense that they're competitive in the market and already market based solutions, but they will definitely come down in costs with RDI efforts. So the innovations usually stem from the basic research and then move on to applied research. And the research and development phase depends a lot of resources with very much uncertainty if it will ever pay back the investments. And both public and private funding play a big role in the early stages of innovation process. And Paula, you work with in a fund that now has the sole purpose of advancing climate solutions. What stages of innovation process does the Finnish Climate Fund support, and what other kinds of funding is involved in innovation process before maturity in Finland?
Yeah, the Climate Fund focuses in solutions that have been already proven in some small scale and are then facing the challenge where they would have to make for the first time some of the bigger investments related to commercial scaling up. I think that our ticket size, which is in the commercial scaling of climate solutions, typically from 2 million euros to 20 million euros, will give an illustration of the kind of phase and kind of context that we would be active in the Climate Fund. Also, we only operate in under 50% shares of the rounds or the projects that we would be providing funding for. So that already means that the total size of the project that the climate fund would be active in would be somewhere between 4 to 40 or even more millions of euros. And that scale already, I think, illustrates that we are talking of already quite substantial implementations at this stage that climate fund is active in. Before that, obviously, a lot already has happened with those climate solutions that we are looking at, and very typically, many of the instruments and funding, for example, from Business Finland, would have been relevant in the earlier stages of those solutions. Business Finland obviously provides R&D funding both in terms of grants and in terms of different kinds of loans. So a typical path, if you would like, would have first steps that would be supported by Business Finland funding, and then when facing the commercial scale up, big first investments, in some cases climate fund could then be a relevant source for funding. And then typically after the climate fund activity, the solution already has proven itself on commercial scale, which would then be the phase where it typically then has access to purely market-based funding from banks and so on and so forth. But it's not black and white, and it's not like that linear. I think it was a great point from Jouni, illustrating that I don't think that for any one technology we can kind of state that now it's mature and somehow its R&D has ended. Like, for example, drawing from my own history of mobile telephony, the global penetration of mobile phones, I think, hit 80% somewhere around before 2010. And after that, everyone knows that huge amounts of R&D investments still have been made globally to mobile telephony as technology. And I think that the very same will apply here. So we are just seeing the first big commercial implementations of many technologies that will actually in themselves create lucrative global markets for even decades, which means that there will be fierce competition, and the best players globally will continue to make huge R&D investments for many of these technologies still in the coming decades.
Exactly, and we'll touch on that more today. But Paula, I would further have a question. To my understanding, the Finnish Climate Fund recently made its first funding to some technologies. What were they, and how did you end up selecting them?
Yes, thanks. So we announced our first decision on funding a company called Solar Foods with a 10 million euro capital loan. The capital loan is used for building a first bigger scale demonstration factory into Finland. The Solar Foods solution is Solein, which is a new disruptive technology around protein creation, and which offers the potential for up to 99% of emission reductions compared to some meat production practices, for example. It actually also, in a very interesting way, combines the technologies of first of all renewable energy and electricity, using renewable energy in the production process. It also has links to hydrogen economy and hydrogen usage, and then it obviously tackles this huge challenge of the global protein production. And I would also like to kind of highlight that even though the Solar Food solution as such is a great example of this sort of a disruptive approach, it's still just on a global scale, it's complementing the many other approaches that will be needed on the side as well. Like we heard from Chad, that even just moving into regenerative agriculture, into still reducing food waste and so on and so forth, we need all of these approaches simultaneously. And Solar Foods is a great example of where technology also can contribute in a more disruptive way. Yeah,
exactly, and really demonstrate nicely how once again, even though the food production in general is maybe quite mature in its development, but there's still room for disruptions and technological solutions that might provide them really rooting for those companies, definitely. So the approach for creating a coherent innovation system differs in all countries and regions, but they are all striving to enhance the success rate of producing new world-class solutions and companies that produce them. Oras, you have been working with climate policy for a long time. How should our climate policy, and as a side note, also the innovation system, develop to support global climate goals, enable Finland in becoming a giant in climate technology?
Well, let me start by pushing back a bit on this division between mature and immature technologies that we have been talking about here. And you mentioned as one case carbon capture and storage, CCS. Why is that immature? Well, partly there is still space for innovation to make the process more energy efficient, to make it more affordable, to make it more reliable and all that. So we need innovation. But more than that, why CCS is not being deployed at scale yet is a pricing issue. So we have a lot of technologies that are technologically, by and large, relatively mature already, but they are not being deployed because our market is rigged in favor of high carbon options. Now, should we want to change that? Should we introduce a strong enough carbon price? Let's say 100 euros per ton of carbon dioxide to start with, and apply that across the economy. That would change the system completely. And it would mean that many of the technologies that we talk about today as immature would actually turn out to be immediately deployable today, just as carbon capture and storage in many cases. Now, to your specific question, there are many things, of course, that public policy can contribute here, but let me just mention two cases, especially perhaps relevant for Finland. One is more of a mindset issue. If you look at the climate policy in Finland, I think there are many good things to say about it, but I would argue that it has by and large neglected the connection between climate policy and industrial policy and export promotion and potential in exporting these new climate solutions. And to give you one example, bioeconomy has been one of the favorite solutions for Finland for such a long time. And to be clear, bioeconomy has a role to play in future sustainable climate positive economy. But it also happens that bioeconomy is not very prominent in most other countries and many big markets, and they are going for slightly different options. Now, if we started thinking about Finnish national climate policy from the perspective of global potentials and from the perspective of how much we could possibly export different climate solutions, I think it might look slightly different. So I would like to change that mindset and integrate the business potential better into our national climate policy choices. Then the other thing, and more concretely, is public procurement. Let's not forget that in a country like Finland, we spend billions and billions and billions of euros every single year in procuring products and services. Now, if we started to harness those billions to a larger extent to go for low carbon options, that would really quite drastically change the market because it would create this early market for these emerging potential solutions. Let me give you just one example. Much of public procurement revolves around construction, be it buildings or infrastructure, and much of that construction uses concrete. Now, the way we produce concrete today is extremely carbon intensive, but there are already today on the market available low carbon concrete options. They are just not being deployed because they are relatively early stage and they are today not necessarily competitive on price terms only. Should we start using public procurement to say, let's say, start with 5% share of concrete coming from low carbon green options? That would already trigger a big change on the market, and that would help Finnish companies to gain the first the customers here in Finland, and then use those references to sell those same products to other countries.
Exactly, easy to agree with those points, and that's also one of our main focus areas on our municipal election targets for tech in this spring, because the public procurement could both promote sustainability and innovations much better than today. And yeah, maybe we can frame today's discussions also in the viewpoint of assuming that the world will set a carbon price high enough for the climate technologies to be market ready. For example, carbon capture and storage, as what was mentioned, we do have the kind of viable technology, but not enough high carbon pricing to make it lucrative. But maybe we look today 20 years ahead and assume that with China, maybe USA, assuming carbon markets and EU's ETS market price going up, we have increasing increasing demand for climate technologies, and they become more competitive that way. But to kind of maybe discuss these early stage innovations for a minute now. A couple of topical examples of the climate solutions still in the early stages are related to the EU recovery efforts and the focus areas that Finland chose to focus on. In the plan of Finnish recovery from the pandemic with the EU funding, it seems that we would be focusing our efforts in the energy sector on carbon capture and storage and clean hydrogen production and products. When selecting certain technologies that we will invest in, we are also at the same time choosing not to focus on many other options that might be lucrative and might prove to be in really high demand in a decade or so. So in a way, we are somewhat selecting winners by choosing which technologies to bet on. Do you agree with the focus areas Finland seems to go with, this CCS and hydrogen? And do we have a chance to be big players with these technologies on the global markets? What are your thoughts? Who would like to start?
Well, maybe I can. So I'm also in the expert group who has been consulted when designing the recovery package. And I'm actually don't even know how big thing the CCS is for the Finnish recovery package, but the hydrogen economy is big. And the reason is that, for example, in transport, so the direct electrification will be the biggest change and is coming at speed. I remember when Sitra made the report a couple of years back, and you forecasted that Finland will have like 800,000 electric vehicles in Finland by 2030, and there were really heavy critics even from the minister level that over my dead body this will never happen, and a lot of critics. So I heard day before yesterday in the climate policy roundtable, which I'm co-chairing with some other ministers or some ministers. There was a calculation that if you take the speed how electric vehicles are coming to Finland in Q1 this year, and then if each quarters will be the same by 2030, we will have 450,000 electric vehicles. And I guess that the speed will not remain the same than the Q1 this year. It will accelerate. So personally, I'm prepared that we will have close to 1 million electric vehicles, at least 700,000, maybe close to 1 million. Because then when things start to change, then the fossil cars will lose their value and so on. So this will speed up the development, and the electric car prices will come down. And I have even calculated, there's excellent calculator done by the Finnish climate panel, is Autokalkulaattori. So you can put the real prices of cars, and I have compared that if you have an old car, the average value is 7,000 euros, and then gasoline car, and then you buy a brand new electric vehicle, the value is like 35,000 euros. So for the 10-year use with average kilometers, you are saving more than 1,000 euros a year, every single year for the next 10 years. But people don't understand these kind of things yet. So this electrification is the big thing in transport, but not everything. Biofuels will have a role, and their role can be increased to a certain point. So I have had like some kind of estimates that maybe 10-20% of the transport fuels could be bio in the long run. But then we have still a big gap. The gap is something like 30-40%. So we need to have drop-in fuels. And drop-in fuels will be then done by cheap electricity. So first you electrolyze hydrogen, actually water to hydrogen and oxygen, and then you use hydrogen directly, or then you take somewhere CO2 or carbon and start to make the fuels, synthetic neutral fuels from the cheap electricity. And actually CLC, if you want to check our website, we are now studying the industrial scale production of these synthetic fuels, that if we replace 15%, 1/5 of the transport fuels by power-to-X fuels, what it would mean. So that is really hot topic. And then with this cheap electricity, you can do fertilizers, you can do proteins. So this is really versatile technology. And I think that it is the right to focus on that area, even from Finland, but that will be also a mass market. So we will even focus more closely what power-to-X niches we really want to focus on and make the difference. And maybe Paula will tell more, but the Solar Foods is a product of a project called Neocarbon. And Neocarbon was developing these first power-to-X solutions. And I was chair of the advisory board for that for years. And when Solar Foods was established, so the kind of rough estimate was that if there, like Oras was telling, the total climate impact. So I have heard some kind of estimates that maybe this kind of technologies could have a carbon handprint, like basically decreasing the carbon footprint elsewhere, like 1 gigatons. So then this is like 200 times the current Finnish net emissions. So if Finland wants to really to maximize the climate impact, we will make these commercial using this public procurement or other demand-based policies. And then we could have a huge carbon handprint, and only like innovation limits of our thinking are our borders. So this is kind of a really exciting area. But in the later on, if you want to hear my opinions also, I can tell the other really potential innovative areas, but I will now let others to talk. Thanks.
Paula, Oras, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I am actually on the record of saying that the Finnish National Recovery Plan is pretty good from a climate perspective, and the priorities outlined in the plan, I think, are by and large the correct ones. And it's the ones that you mentioned, but there are also others. So, for instance, circular economy is quite nicely included, electrification and some other sectors as well. And I think they are the key ones from a climate perspective. But I think you touched upon a very interesting topic, which is the extent to which policymakers should be choosing where to invest and where to focus. And I think you can have two extremes on a spectrum, and both extremes are, in my opinion, wrong. One is to be entirely agnostic about which technologies to choose, and the other is to completely choose and lock in the choices by policymakers. And both would lead to very high risks. And there has to be a sweet spot between these two extremes. And why I say that is that if you don't make any choices at all, then it's unlikely that you're going to get the scale required to have an impact globally. And we can talk about different examples, but you would not probably get a cluster if you use a very old-fashioned terminology, or you can't really create a new industry. You can have really good individual companies, and some companies can work together, but to develop a whole industry or a whole ecosystem of companies, then for that scale to emerge, you need to make some strategic choices. And that is what Finland is doing currently. I think it might have been better to do some of those choices some years earlier, because in some cases we are joining the party a bit late. Hydrogen is a great example of that, but it's better to do that now than never. And I think you have to make some choices, and there are risks involved. So you might bet the wrong horse, and then that's life. But if you don't make any choices at all, I don't think you're going to develop the industries at scale.
Yeah, maybe to add on what Joni and Oras already told, my perspective to the recovery package is that whereas it is important, I think it's only still a part of a quite big other sources as well, both private and public, of funding. And when you look at the total investments and funding, my personal view is that we have not narrowed it down too much. So I don't think that there's too much narrowing down yet. I think it's also a question of balancing the different approaches. So it's important to maintain, as part of the total innovation funding, enough like quite pure bottom-up approaches, where certain amounts of certain grants and so on and so forth are purely based on some criteria allocated to the best applications, regardless of whether they hit your predefined focus areas and so on and so forth. So there are mechanisms that you can maintain in the system as a whole to ensure that you have the right balance of very market-based, bottom-up type of activities. Obviously, all of the, broadly speaking, policy actions are always kind of very broad and very quite often quite market neutral. At least you can make in taxation and so on and so forth, you can make these sort of broad market neutral choices. So when you balance these different approaches, I think then you can also manage your risk as a system. So I wouldn't be too worried that we would have made too much narrowing down at this point.
And can I tell, because I was in charge of the international venture capital activities of Imatran Voima during the 90s, so 6 years. And then we invested 3 venture capital funds in the States, and 2 were really successful, and then 1 hit the IT bubble. So that was unlucky timing. But anyway, I was also involved quite deeply with the IPO of 2 companies who were bigger than Apple when they were listed in the NASDAQ. And they were both in the telecommunications area, optical fibers actually. So the statistics are such that you have like 200 R&D projects. Then you end up doing like maybe 100 business plans, or 60 or 70. Then the venture capital company is investing 20 after really heavy like studies and evaluations. And from those 20, about half go to bankrupt. And then you are betting that whether you will find 1 or 2 really stars from your portfolio. And then you focus them really, really heavily, try to make them big. And that is basically the name of the game. So we cannot narrow it too early. So it is good that, and in Finland, for example, I think that we have good R&D background. We have really good R&D, like a source and good projects. Then we have also good developments in the beginning, and now this climate fund is helping that and some other sources. But then what is the problem in EU in general, also in Finland, is to how to make these success stories big. So typically they need to get speed from the California or maybe from China, and this is something also what we are working on, that how we can also make the big IPOs in Europe. But today the status, we are not currently competitive with the USA and China yet.
Thank you. That was a good addition to the discussion with the failure rate of startups and companies. That makes it the market-based approach so good that we get the best ones in the end. We have a question from the audience from Ville Seppälä, wondering if BECCS bioenergy with carbon capture and storage be a good sector for Finland to invest in. the bioenergy sector is and probably remains so large. Do you have any thoughts on this? I think it's been quite heavily discussed because Finland has a lot of forests and we use a lot of bioenergy and burn biomass. So should we focus on this? I guess it's also in the IPCC modelings of the 1.5 degree kind of pathways. This plays a big role in those to get to 1.5 degrees. What are your thoughts? Oras, please.
Indeed, BECCS features very prominently on modeling pathways that are compatible with limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. That is partly a modeling artifact, just to be clear, because most of the models have a very limited set of negative emissions technologies to choose from. And then, of course, if you only have basically one that seems to make sense from a modeling perspective, then the modeling will produce a result saying that we will need massive amounts of BECCS. Now, that may or may not be the case, but it's partly down to the modeling. I do think that Finland has a really good opportunity here. And why that is the case, because often it makes sense to build on your earlier strengths and successes. And what Finland has been good at has been, first of all, using and processing biomass for various purposes. And secondly, in power plant technology. Let's not forget that Finland has been one of the leading countries in developing power plant technology. And what is BECCS basically? It is combining these two and a couple of other fields as well. And I'm not always getting a lot of friends when I speak in favor of BECCS, because there is this conception that if you rely on BECCS, it's going to mean that you have to use large areas of land to produce biomass dedicated for the use of BECCS only. But what I think is easily forgotten is that in countries like Finland, you already have large point sources of biogenic carbon as it is today. That is power plants, that is pulp and paper factories, that is the production of biofuels, that is waste to energy plants. And if you just basically installed CCS to these already existing facilities, you would not need to use much more biomass than you are already using today. So you would not increase the pressure on our ecosystems, but you would get the benefit of producing negative emissions through BECCS. So I'm a big proponent of BECCS in the context of Finland, as long as we follow certain sustainability safeguards.
Yeah, me too. I wish we take a big role in that. Okay, so we have also discussed a bit about these more mature technologies. Jouni was talking about this breakthrough of electric cars, and they really are coming and breaking through in the market, and many consultation companies are expecting them to reach the market parity, price parity of gasoline-powered cars by 2025, so in just a few years. And we also mentioned that solar and wind are...
Purchasing price.
Yeah, thanks. We also mentioned that solar and wind are already really competitive in the electricity market. Are there still some innovation deficits in these more mature technologies, such as wind power or electric vehicles, that Finland should also touch upon and try to grab a share of the market? Or is it too late for us? Did we already lose the game and we should only focus on the hydrogen and BECCS and such, the kind of up and coming technologies? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, electricity, for example, the storages, because now we have like batteries for cars, but they are good for the equator area where you don't have a winter peaks or summer peaks. So the seasonal storages for industrial use is still a big area for the development. And then also the load demand response, how the whole system will be balanced when it's using a lot of electric cars and other sources of electricity, and when the buildings are storing energy and then they are releasing energy when the price conditions are good for that. So, for example, those kind of options exist. And then in the storage, it's not only batteries, because when you go for the little bit longer term storages, then you start to do chemical conversion. So you start to store some energy for the materials, or maybe even do the hard rock. So that is very big option for us, and a lot of opportunities for developing new solutions.
Yeah, so there's still room in the value chain. Any other thoughts on Oras or Paula?
I was looking at Paula, but I'll just share a couple of thoughts. If I kind of rephrase your question, if there is space for Finland in these relatively mature and already big and commercial markets, I think there's at least two approaches to that. One is that if you can find a niche, or niche as the Americans tend to say, in those markets, then you can be the world leader on a quite specific and very narrow part of a very big market. So for instance, wind power is very mature today, but producing wind power in Arctic conditions, de-icing the blades, for instance, is something that not very many countries and companies know how to do yet. So you can find your kind of niche there. Then the other thing is coming back to what I said earlier about relying and building on your existing strengths. If you can find areas where you truly have a comparative advantage compared to other countries, and I think we've seen that kind of developments, for instance, in the area of data centers. We have a cold climate and we have cheap green electricity available. We have a user and a buyer for the waste heat that is produced by the data centers, and we have many other advantages over many other countries. So if you can find, even in big markets, some really strong comparative advantages compared to our competitors, then I think we do have a chance there as well.
And nothing to add. Those were great points from Jouni and Oras already. And also just to mention that, as has been highlighted here, many of these phenomena will be so wide and long lasting that we don't have to, as kind of a Finland, be the dominant player even in those technologies or those phenomena. We can still have huge lucrative businesses by individual companies and groups of companies, Finnish companies, in just attached to even just the niches of those phenomena. So nothing to add there.
Thank you. Very, very good points. And I guess the state of Texas in USA would like to have some wind power defrosting technology. This spring, they were in a lot of trouble with their energy supply. Okay, we have maybe time for one more quick audience question before the ending. And we have this three-part question from Yuri Salpakari. It's about the Helsinki Energy Challenge, which took place in about the last year or so, and the finalists and winners were published recently. And his question is about how many of those technologies that were suggested in the competitions are not yet market ready. So which organizations could fund and carry out such R&D initiatives based on the ideas screened from that competition? Do you have any thoughts about this?
I think Paula has a lot of money, so I'm again looking at the...
But so I can't now remember all of those solutions and ideas, but when they are at the idea phase and still not market ready and would require quite a lot of R&D and also maybe developing the business model and the business plan further and so on and so forth. So from those perspectives, I think that they would be the ideal candidates for Business Finland funding first. But I think that also everything has to start with the passionate team, because even if there would be all of the money in the world, there has to be the people who want to make it happen and start applying for the funding and proceeding with the idea and the innovation. So I think that even now, turning to my old employer Sitra even might have a role at the stage where you actually need to lighten up the passion in a groups of diverse people and make people come together first to realize the ideas, to realize the possibilities. And then when you have the teams, you have the people, you have the passion, then they can turn to many of the funding sources in Business Finland, and then the ones that actually succeed and are able to demonstrate their solution in small scale first, so then they can come to climate fund for the big investment.
And the companies. There may be many companies.
And the companies.
Many.
Because we only give a maximum of 50%, so they will also need the private money there.
There may be many companies who would be interested in those. Typically, if the company see a good idea which fits to the business model, they seem to activate on that topic.
Exactly, and there's a lot of resource needs that the companies already have, and also the competences and processes, and that could be a big help for those up and coming projects with the in the early stages of their development. So we're almost at the end of time, so we only have time for our kind of last remarks, and it would be or what would you like to emphasize for our audience, something that you feel that is the one thing that the audience should remember about the topic of today, or something that you wanted to say in this discussion but didn't have the chance to say it? What would be your key message to the audience, so to speak? Would you like to start, Oras?
Sure. I can be a poor man's Alexander Stubb and share 3 points. The first is building on what Chad said in the beginning. We have a lot of existing solutions that just need to be scaled up fast. So we don't need to wait for innovation to happen to start taking action. The second is that if we get the carbon pricing right, then many of the technologies that we see today as immature actually turn out to be relatively mature and that can be deployed already. And the third is that innovation doesn't come out of thin air. It is very much dependent on the right enabling framework provided by smart policy choices. And I think there we have a lot more work to do also here in Finland.
Thank you, Oras. And then Paula, you're up.
Thanks. I have to comment on this. Innovation doesn't come from thin air, because Solar Foods is making protein from thin air, but sometimes it even can come from thin air. But nevertheless, I think the key takeaway has to be that there will not be lack of opportunity in this space. So I don't think we have to worry that there will be a lack of opportunity, and I don't think we're going to run out of time. There's two different things. We are in an urgent 10 to 15 years time frame as humanity in solving climate change, but that does not mean that there wouldn't be time. There will be time for the next year, for the next 10 years, for next 20 years, for next 30 years around solving this issue of climate change and sustainable future, and competing on the huge global markets that solving these issues will create.
Thank you, Paula. That's encouraging words. Jouni, you're the last one. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I agree fully with Oras and Paula, and then I use my remaining time for advertising. So we made a book with Mari Pantsar called Tienhaarassa, Crossroads. This tells about all we have discussed today. And also English version is coming at this moment. It looks that we can publish that in August. But this tells how climate change started and where we are, and relating to systemic solution, carbon price, but also it has a quite long part from the technological status and options. Thank you. And
everyone should read it.
All the incomes will go to the Children's Climate Fund, and they are invested by Tiina and Antti Hellis Foundation to the children's education.
That's a great book. I can personally recommend it, and it's nice to hear that it's also coming in English. To sum up the discussion, we have this comment from Raili Kajaste in Facebook. Global carbon credit pricing and market pull consumer behavior change determine the future. I think that really kind of sums up much of the discussion that we had today, and really sets the tone for what to do after this seminar to kind of get these ideas and technologies going and to market maturity. Thank you very much to our audience, active audience in the chat boxes of YouTube and Facebook. Thank you, Jouni, Oras, and Paula, for your participation in the discussion, and thanks to Tuomas from Kaute Foundation for great collaboration in organizing this webinar. So have a good evening and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.